A wise man once said, "It's always darkest before the dawn." Now, there'll be a lot of times when either myself or someone else will try and teach you a little bit more about God through these talks by telling you something entertaining or something funny, trying to make you laugh. Today's talk isn't like that. Today's talk is a serious talk about serious things. This weekend of all times, it's important that we stop and we think about what actually happened to Jesus on Easter weekend. I promise I'll try not to make it scary, and I won't stay on the bad bits for too long. But it's also important not to lie to you and to tell you the truth of what happened that weekend. If you can find your Bibles and turn to Mark in chapter 14, there's a few verses as we go that will help us learn the story. When we left you last, it was Palm Sunday. Jesus had arrived in Jerusalem on his donkey. The crowds were cheering and waving, and they were laying the palm branches down. But now, we find ourselves in a garden in the dark. A lot of things have happened between then and now. But what were they? On Monday, he went to the temple, but he found it full of people just making money. He got so angry, he tipped their tables over, scattered their money everywhere. Why weren't they there to learn about God? On Tuesday, he had to be really careful how he answered questions from the religious leaders. They were trying to trick him so that he'd say something wrong and he could be arrested by the Roman soldiers. Then a woman came and washed his feet with special oils. And finally, he told his disciples all about what was about to happen. Wednesday seems to have been quite a quiet day. Nothing really seems to have happened that's recorded in the Bible. But then we come to Thursday. On Thursday, he sat down with his disciples for a last meal. At that meal, he broke bread with them and introduced them to the idea of communion, something which the adults still do when the church is together every week, to this day, nearly 2,000 years later. We remembered this weekend through the act of communion. Later that night, after that final meal, Jesus and his disciples take themselves to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. Jesus asks his disciples to pray as well. He takes himself off a little way to pray by himself, but every time he comes back to the disciples, they've fallen asleep. They're so tired, they can't even do this one thing that Jesus has asked them. And it's then that Judas returns to the group, one of the original 12 disciples. But he doesn't come alone. He comes at the head of a crowd. This time it's not a happy crowd. It's an angry crowd, armed with swords and clubs. They've come for Jesus. And how does Judas, one of Jesus' closest friends, seal his betrayal of Jesus? Mark 14, verse 45. He went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and he kissed him. One of Jesus' closest friends has turned their back on him and handed him over to this angry crowd. But not only that, he did it with a kiss. And then to make matters worse, all of Jesus' other friends scatter. They run, frightened for their own safety, and leave him to face the crowd alone. Mark 14, verse 50. And they all left him and fled. Jesus is led away to the council of the priests, and there people line up to tell lies about him. They accuse him, they rip his clothes, they spit on him, and the guards beat him. And somewhere near the back of the watching crowd, Jesus' last remaining friend, Peter, denies knowing him, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Mark 14, verse 69 and 70. And the servant girl saw him and began to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. Jesus is all alone, beaten and betrayed. And the day is only just beginning. It's Good Friday. Now, Good Friday as a name sounds happy and full of joy. It's Good Friday. It's got a better and happier name than Palm Sunday did, and Palm Sunday was all about a big celebration. So Good Friday must be a right happy old time. But it isn't. The priests, having put Jesus through all of this shouting and accusations and beatings and spitting on, they decide to hand him over to the Roman leader, Pilate. Now, Pilate talks to Jesus, but he can't find anything that Jesus is guilty of. But he doesn't want to upset the priests. So he's stuck. What can he do? But then he comes up with a plan. Every year on the Feast of Passover, Pilate releases a prisoner that the crowd have asked for. Now he thinks, this year, what I'll do is I'll put Jesus as one of them, and then I'll put this man called Barabbas as the other. Now Barabbas, he's a murderer. There's no way that the crowds are going to choose Barabbas.
Mark 15 verse 11. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas instead.
These priests hate Jesus so much, they actually get the crowd to ask for the release of the murderer instead of Jesus. And so Jesus must now be crucified. The Roman soldiers whip him, they spit on him, and they make fun of him. And finally, they lead him away. They give Jesus his cross and tell him to carry it, but he's so tired and beaten, he can't. Remember, he hasn't had any sleep for 2 days. The cross they give him isn't light either. The Gospels don't give us sizes, but lots of other sources suggest that it would be 3.5 meters long. That's this size. Can you imagine trying to carry something this big and heavy? Jesus can't. And so the Romans ask a man called Simon to help him. And together they carry that cross to a place called Golgotha. And it's here that Jesus is put on the cross. And the soldiers don't just put Jesus on the cross, they nail him to it. One through each of his hands and one through his feet. And it's there on the cross, hurting, that Jesus dies. Now, Dave and I and others are forever telling you that Jesus is the Son of God. He can do amazing things. He can take 5 loaves and 2 fish and feed 5,000 people. He can heal the sick. He can make the blind men see. He can even raise people from the dead. So if Jesus can do all of that, why does he let all this bad stuff happen to himself? Why doesn't he just make it stop? Do you remember on Sunday when we said about how Jesus was fulfilling all these promises about himself by riding on the donkey and the palm branches? Well, this is fulfilling the biggest promise ever made about Jesus. This is the one about how he was the one who came to save us. He was the only one who could take away our sin.
John 8 verse 12. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life.
Did you see the moon this week? Even through the clouds, it shines brightly. Back at the beginning, I told you it's always darkest before the dawn. Well, this part of the story is the darkness. The dawn is coming, the light will shine again, and it will shine more brilliantly and more brightly because of the darkness. But more about that on Sunday.